Bonjour. It's really nice to be here and see at least a few familiar faces. Thank you for that introduction, Christina. She didn't tell you she used to work with me. I miss having you. Christina was a delight and was a big contribution to the water quality program that we have here at Fond du Lac. I have been honored to serve in this capacity now for almost 26 years. I was hired in 1997, fresh out of the University of Kansas, where I was finishing, Jayhawk, where I was finishing up my master's degree in aquatic ecology, because I've always had a real passion for water, for lakes, for the world around us, and always have wanted to understand it more. Have always felt the kind of connection to it that I think a lot of you do. Connection to the land, connection to the water. And so when I was hired on, our program was just getting underway, the environmental program at the Fond du Lac Resource Management Division. And I was the third person hired on. And Fond du Lac, the RBC had already decided at the time that they hired me that they wanted to take a very proactive approach to protecting the water resources of the reservation. I mean, you look around, we have water, we have wetlands, we have an abundance of these resources, and they're in pretty good shape. And we want to protect that. We want to keep them in really good shape. And one of the ways that tribes can do that is to essentially be on a level playing field with the state governments and being authorized under the Clean Water Act to have water quality standards. And so the Fond du Lac RBC had already decided this is the route that we want to go down for Fond du Lac. We want to take on that authority so that we can do everything possible to protect our precious water resources. So I was interested in that, but I was excited about the idea of coming to this place where the waters are in such good shape and learning about the lakes and the streams and Monoman and all of that. And over the years, I've had a chance to really get to know our water resources up close and personal. We're doing a lot of monitoring. We've got 25 years of water quality data on our lakes and streams and the St. Louis River. And it has helped us strengthen our water quality standards and protections on the reservation waters, and puts us in a place where we actually have a seat at the table when decisions are made about projects and activities that humans do in the landscape that affect our water resources. And so some of the big ones might come to mind. You think about polymet and mining, and now there's Talon Metals out in Tamarack, and there's pipelines, and there's Superfund sites, and there's all of the kind of, Great Lakes environmental degradation that is being addressed now and cleaned up. But most of those activities fall under ways that you can regulate those pollution sources. But far and away, the biggest sources of nutrient pollution, primarily nitrogen and phosphorus, same nutrients that you want to grow your tomatoes and your orchards and your pumpkins and your corn. Those same nutrients, when you've got too much of them, can cause all kinds of bad impacts in the waters that receive excess nutrients. And so that is under a broad umbrella of non-regulatory. In other words, there's no permits, there's no limits or criteria or anything for the biggest source of nutrient pollution in our country, which is agriculture. And so primarily the problems that we're concerned about arise from the big operations, the large scale farms, the factory farms, the CAFOs, and confined animal feedlots that are housing, 1,000 head of hog or cattle or whatever. those cause tremendous amounts of pollution released to our waters. But it's also important to remember that there are things that each and every one of us can do, because whatever humans do on the landscape can affect the waters. And that's really the crux of what Nikki invited me to come talk to you about. And that's to kind of think through the way we manage water and sediment and nutrients and pesticides in our garden plots, in our yards and around our homes, anywhere that we are doing things to the landscape, so that we can make sure we are not contributing to the problem. And no, nobody's going to come with a citation or haul you off to court. It's just more of a means of thinking about how we can all be good stewards of the resources that we have opportunities to protect and to nurture and harvest. And I think that, you know, if you're all sitting here tonight, you all care about doing things in a good way and about making sure that the foods that you're raising are healthy for you and your family to eat, and that whatever you're doing on the landscape is not unhealthy for the lakes and the streams and the wetlands that are nearby. So I just wanted to kind of walk through some ideas about how nutrients can cause problems, especially nutrients that come from our kinds of activities on the landscape. I live in Duluth on a typical lakeside half-acre lot. And over the 20-some years that I've been living there, my husband and I have been slowly getting away from lawn. There is less and less lawn around me and more perennials, because I love flowers, and pollinator plants to make the butterflies and the pollinating insects happy, and the birds that come to eat grubs and all of that kind of stuff. But up on my deck, because I am in Lakeside and it's always colder by the lake, and I need good sunshine and warm sunshine to coax vegetables all the way through a growing season. Up on my deck is where I do my gardening, my farm. And it's in big planter boxes and pots and things like that. So I've got a lot of control over anything that I want to put, whether it's the compost that my husband is making. He's gotten to be quite the compost hero and is really proud that our compost heap is 160 degrees already. He wants to see it steaming. So we use composting. I do not use pesticides. That's a personal choice. Try to find other ways to manage insect pests and to prevent diseases. Prevention usually works better than treatment. But as far as nutrients, I don't have to feed my plants, my gardens, my pots, my container of red hot chili peppers, because we're using that compost. So we're using that those naturally available nutrients, the nitrogen and the phosphorus and the iron and the micronutrients and all of that that's important for the plants to grow and to thrive can be derived from that compost. So when I started, it came with a little bit of like a traditional potting mix, but I first was buying WSSD's compost because it's pretty good quality. It's really consistent. But now, like I say, we're doing our own composting. So every year when I'm creating my vegetable boxes and gardens, I'm using compost as my source of nutrients. And that's all that it needs. I can control the water. There's no runoff going anywhere. So that's one example, but I'm ultra small scale. You guys all have access, I'm assuming, or are planning to plant pots out here. So, or maybe you're doing it at home, raised beds and whatever it is that Nikki and Leland are doing at their place. You need to be a little bit thoughtful about location and materials and methods so that your practices on your land are not causing problems in waters that are nearby. It could be a wetland that's just downslope from you. It could be a creek that's 100 yards away from you, or if you're near a lake, you need to be really thinking about how close to the lake shore you want to be disturbing the ground and cultivating and any kind of management with your plants. The problem with nutrients is that it can be so very easy to over apply, or to apply it at the wrong time, or for instance, like right before a big heavy rainstorm, where instead of soaking down into the root zone where you really want it to get, a lot of it just gets washed off. And it can carry a lot of sediment with it, especially if you've tilled the soil and you don't have a ground cover or a mulch or some kind of geotextile or whatever you might be using, wild rice hulls. It can wash off, and it can carry sediments to the nearest receiving water. Maybe it's just a ditch. Maybe that ditch is connected to Otter Creek or Big Lake or whatever. Water's connected, as you know. And if it's running off of a slope, off of a property into a nearby receiving water, it can then be transported into places where it can really cause a lot of harm. What we're mostly concerned about is how excess nutrients, nitrogen, phosphorus, can lead to algae blooms when it gets into water bodies, either streams or in lakes. And the algae, it then causes kind of a ripple effect in terms of the water quality of the water that's experiencing that algae bloom. That algae could be toxic. Some kinds of algae can actually produce toxins that can be harmful to humans and to wildlife and to pets. It can cause the water to become so turbid, so cloudy, that it can't penetrate to the sunlight can't penetrate to the natural plants that want to grow there. And so you have a problem with all of the water lilies and the bulrushes and the kinds of submergent coontail vegetation that are natural and healthy growing in water bodies. They can't grow any longer, and all you're doing is feeding an algae soup in the lake. And then those algae will die, and as they're dying, they decompose and they suck the oxygen out of the water, and that's how you can end up with fish kills. So excess algae can kill off other plants. It can lead to fish kills and die-offs, and it can be downright toxic. Nitrogen is a problem also if it is introduced to the groundwater. Remember, again, water is all connected, whether it's in the ground or whether you can see it in a wetland pool here in the springtime, or in Fond du Lac Creek, or in Simon Lake, or wherever you might like to go fishing. That water is all connected. And sometimes excess nutrients applied to your farms, to your soils, trickles down, infiltrates into the groundwater, and can cause problems, again, wherever it's flowing within the groundwater. But think about how close that might be to your well, for instance. Some folks have deeper wells, but a lot of folks in this area have relatively shallow wells. It's in the upper unconsolidated aquifer is what we call it. If your well is less than about 200 feet deep, then all of that ground that water can percolate through, it can move really fast. You get a lot of sand and cobbles and things like that, the glaciers left behind, and that excess nitrogen can make its way down into where your well is drawing your drinking water. And all over the country, and including here in Minnesota, where we do have a lot of agriculture in other parts of the state, too much nitrogen in your well water, if it's in the form of nitrate, is a real health concern. It causes what they call blue baby syndrome. And it's a situation where if drinking water, or if you're using it to make formula, or juice or whatever you're giving to your children, especially children, they're very vulnerable to that. It makes it difficult for their bodies to hold on to and process enough oxygen in their bloodstream. So that's why it's called blue baby. It causes them to really struggle to stay oxygenated properly. And this is a problem, a growing problem around the state. And so I think about problems with nitrogen primarily as getting into the groundwater, the drinking water. I think about problems with excess phosphorus is quite often associated not just with the fertilizers that you might be using, but also with the sediment itself. Phosphorus is attached to soil particles. It's a really rich source of phosphorus. And so if we are doing things on the landscape that are not only disturbing that earth so that it's really loose and erodible and can be washed off in a big rain event, it can lead to not only just carrying the nutrient part, but also the sediment part into the water bodies, where it can also cause problems like choking out habitat for fish spawning, whatever. If you think about too much sediment washing off of a landscape and getting down into a receiving water, a river or a stream or whatever, it can cause problems like that when it settles down into the cobbles on the bottom. But it also contributes to those problems, those turbidity problems. You've probably all seen pictures or video after big flood events like the 2012 flood that we had, what the water looked like as it was running through the St. Louis River estuary and out into Lake Superior. And even now, after a big storm event, you can see that big sediment plume settling out or moving out into Lake Superior, having been carried all the way downstream in the St. Louis River from sources all over the place. And again, that sediment load in the moving waters can also do the same things I was talking about before. It keeps sunlight from penetrating and being able to help the rooted vegetation in these water bodies grow. And it can lead to algal blooms as well, because it's also delivering a big load of nutrients. So we think a lot about being in the Lake Superior Basin. That's kind of the body of water that most of us relate to here. On the left band of Lake Superior, Chippewa, being down in the estuary, being out on Wisconsin Point. We all kind of relate to the big lake, right? But I'm not sure that any of you realize that a small part of the reservation actually lies in the headwaters of the Mississippi. So if you're driving along Highway 210 and you see Wild Rice Lake, there's about 4,000 or 5,000 acres of the reservation that lies in the headwaters of the Mississippi River. It's connected via the Moosehorn River to the Kettle River to the St. Croix River to the Mississippi River. So we're literally way up at the top of the watershed of the Mississippi, just like out in Itasca. If any of you have been to the Mississippi headwaters, we're kind of the headwaters too. Because nutrient problems are widespread across the country. In fact, they are so bad that over the years, the nutrients and the sediments that our poor farmland in the middle of the United States, in the Mississippi drainage, has been delivering all the way down the main stem and out the delta in Louisiana, out into the Gulf of Mexico, has created what they call a dead zone. Hypoxic zone, a place where there's no oxygen in the water out in the Gulf of Mexico. And that's because of the very things that I was talking to you about. Those excess nutrients cause huge algal blooms. It kills off fish and other aquatic life. When they settle and decompose, that chews up oxygen, and you end up with this huge area of low oxygen out in the main body of the Gulf of Mexico. Been studying that for a long, long time. And there's been a task force working on that for about the last 10 years, all the big major government agencies, some tribal participants, states, of course. And Minnesota is actually one of the biggest contributors to that hypoxic zone down in the Gulf of Mexico. Not so much the Mississippi itself, the main stem of the Mississippi. A lot of it comes from the Minnesota River, which dumps into the Mississippi, in the Twin Cities area. But that just means that it's another wake-up call that we are potentially all a part of the problem, and we all need to think about what we can do as individuals to make sure we're not a big part of the problem and less of a problem and more of a solution. There is some new funding, in fact, coming to tribes and states that lie within this Mississippi basin, and it's all under the umbrella of addressing this Gulf hypoxia, lack of oxygen problem. So we've got a new funding source that Fond du Lac is going to be seeking some resources to help with our staff and with programming so that we can be a part of the solution. What we're planning to do with that money is to work on nutrient standards for our water quality standards, right? We're continuing to do what we can to make sure that we're protecting really high quality resources and aren't sending our problem downstream. We're going to also develop, as far as I know, potentially the first tribal water quality ag certification program, and it'll be modeled after what the state of Minnesota is doing. The state of Minnesota has actually taken some big steps in the non-point source pollution, agriculture non-point source pollution problem. Farmers like to think that, we are good stewards of the land. We know what we're doing, but they can also do more and do better. And so this water quality certification for agriculture is intended to help set some benchmarks for farms and producers to be able to check it off and say, yes, I'm doing these best practices. I'm managing how water is moving across my landscape. I'm protecting my wetlands and my streams and my adjacent water bodies. I'm making sure that I don't have erosion problems and sending all kinds of sediment. I'm protecting our drinking water supply because I'm not putting so much nitrogen into the ground that it's getting down into our drinking water sources. So those are just some really general concepts that I wanted to talk about. I would like to share with you a story about a project that we were involved in that kind of pulls it all together with one story. We don't have a whole lot of big agriculture on the reservation. In fact, we've got some hay fields where they cut alfalfa a few times a year. We've got a couple of small-ish, I won't even call them feedlots, cattle operations, small dairies. We've got a few places where they've got horses, but we really don't have a lot of agriculture on the reservation. But over the years, there have been places on the reservation where there was more farming done. In fact, you may or may not realize that the ditches that were dug out on the ditch banks around the wild rice lakes, those were dug under federal judicial order over 100 years ago when the U.S. government was trying to encourage homesteading, and they were trying to attract farmers to come up and homestead and tame this wild land. And they weren't even really thinking about the fact that we don't have the best soils for that kind of large-scale farming. We certainly don't have a long enough growing season to do the kind of agriculture that they're doing down in Missouri or in Ohio or whatever. But we're left with, some permanent results of that. Well, in Third Lake, does anybody know where Third Lake is on the reservation? Yeah, I know you do. You do. If you're driving along Big Lake Road and if you're coming from Cloquet and you're driving out towards the Tribal Center, for instance, if you look off to your left, you'll see Second Lake. Second Lake is the one that's right up next to the new walking path. If you keep kind of peeking through the trees off to your left, you'll see another big body of water. It's not big, but another body of water. That's Third Lake. Third Lake is only about 14, 15 acres. So no, it's not a really big lake, but it's kind of deep. It's shaped like a big old-fashioned bathtub. It's oval and it's about 20 feet deep. And it doesn't have a direct inflow, like a stream coming directly into it. There's a little bit of a drainage ditch, but it doesn't have a direct inflow, and it doesn't have a direct outflow the way some lakes do, where water can come in and be in the lake for a while and then go out. So it's kind of landlocked. And back in the 40s and 50s, there were some farms in that small watershed surrounding Third Lake. Right now, I don't think there's anything other than they keep the grass mowed under the flight path for the Locato Airport. But there used to be some agriculture there. There used to be a racetrack, is what I heard. They used to do horse racing. There was a racing oval. Now there's still a barn right on the lake shore. And the homeowners there, the landowners, have over the years boarded horses for people. And they've been a little strapped for resources. And so over the years that they were boarding horses, they were just mucking out the stalls, and they had this mountain of manure. No kidding, it was probably longer than this building. And it was probably only about 30 or 40 feet set back from the lake shore. In fact, one year, I swear I saw zucchinis growing out of the manure. I think they were actually farming on there, but that's beside the point. We've got manure, a source of nutrients, right? They also were not fencing that lake shore. So the horses, curious as they are, would come trotting down the path when they saw us out there in our canoe doing our water sampling, and they had full access to the water's edge. So much so that it was all trampled down, and it was bare grass, or not bare grass, bare land right next to the so there you've got nutrients, and you've got open land that can be eroded and can wash off. And so there was, over time, all of these sediments and nutrients, especially phosphorus, that were running off into this lake, and it had nowhere to go. And so, 30, 40 years ago, people were swimming in that lake and fishing in that lake. There's still some homes around there. In fact, my boss lives out there. But we were getting to see algal blooms. And it's like the one place on the reservation that we saw algae blooms and could really make the connection to why was this happening. And so we got a grant to do something about it. It wasn't just the fact that there was all of this nutrients, phosphorus running off into the lake. It was also that over time, that phosphorus was continuing to circulate throughout the lake because of kind of the shape of the lake and the physical properties and all of the things that I learned back in college about aquatic ecology and how lakes work. There was what we were calling this internal cycling of phosphorus. It was getting turned over and over and over again and fueling continual algal blooms. Well, there's a treatment that you can do. There's a product called aluminum sulfate that you can apply very precisely, very measured, very buffered. We did all of the work to establish the right dosing of that. But before we were going to invest in an expensive project like that, we worked with the landowner. We got to know the farmer. We brought our friends from NRCS in to come over and talk to them about resources available to help them manage the manure. In fact, some of that manure that had been there for so long and was so nicely composted, our guys at Resource Management, I believe, and Forestry, put into a trailer and hauled it over to the Journey Garden or somewhere to be used to fertilize some of the earlier gardening projects that Nikki was instrumental in getting started back when. Oh yeah, yeah, it's darn good fertilizer for sure. So it was our project was really successful, and we can measure it with our monitoring program. We have been able to demonstrate that we have improved water clarity. All of the water chemistry that we can measure, including the nutrient concentrations, are down where they're supposed to be. But this never would have worked if we hadn't worked with the farmer to address the source of the problem to begin with. The farmer got something out of this. They got some assistance, and they got connected to the NRCS that had some technical assistance to offer them, and the ability to help them construct a better manure management system in the long term. And then we were able to move forward with the project that we wanted to do to clean up the problem that had developed. And I think that it's a really good example. It's one that the story that I really like to share with my tribal partners, because it's, I think it kind of hits all of the notes that you need to think about when you're addressing an environmental problem. You need to think about what's causing the problem, what can we do to fix it, what can we do to keep it from happening again. And so that, in a nutshell, is what I think I wanted to share with you tonight. And I'd be happy to take questions, or Nikki had suggested that we could do a walkabout and kind of see what's going on. Yeah.
Resting tape to support our community regarding tank pumps that can dominate.
Again, what a small farmer or a small producer can do is the same things that a large producer can do, just on a smaller scale. It's being smart about how you apply fertilizers, whether they're organic, whether they're manure, or whether they're bought from, the feed store. Being smart about the timing and the amount of your application, being very careful about how you're cultivating and managing your soil and your bare soil, and hopefully not leaving soils bare for any length of time. Being very mindful of things like slope, because slope means you are going to be really vulnerable to having that kind of runoff that is going to cause problems somewhere downstream that might not even be on your property. It might be in the downstream line. So those are some of the things. I did print out some handouts that we can make available electronically too. I can do that tomorrow. Make sure that people have links to PDFs. But they're just really general information about nutrient pollution. This came off of EPA's website. I got lots of copies for anybody that's here tonight. Another one from the EPA, protecting water quality from agricultural runoff. And then finally, what is sediment and what is the problem? Because I just wanted to emphasize that sediment is a twofer. It causes problems with turbidity and light penetration. It also represents a likely source of phosphorus nutrient pollution. Yep. It's pretty hard. It's pretty hard to work at 1,400 feet deep. Yeah, hold on. There's all kinds of really fascinating things to think about and talk about with regards to lakes. That'd be a whole nother visit. But yeah, I have opportunities in my position to represent Fond du Lac in a lot of working groups that deal with Lake Superior issues, for instance. Well, yes, St. Louis River is kind of an odd situation because we've also got a series of dams on that river that lie between here on Fond du Lac and down at the bottom at Chambers Grove and the Fond du Lac village, right? And there's a lot of sediments that get trapped behind those dams. So the sediments that we see coming from the St. Louis River going out the mouth and into Lake Superior, a lot of that comes from right in the estuary, off of the slopes of Duluth. You know, a lot of the streams and a lot of urban runoff. That urban runoff is a big problem as well. I was asked to focus on agriculture, but stormwater runoff from urban sources is a big problem too for nutrients and sediment. And then there's the, I'll call it more natural source over in the Bimaaji'idiwin and Pokegama, because coming off of those clay slopes over on the plains in northwestern Wisconsin, it's cutting through a lot of really erodible clay banks. And so a lot of the sediment source is coming from the urban runoff and from the Wisconsin side.
It's a lot to think about. I didn't realize, Nancy had touched on it before, but I had worked with her or underneath her before I came over here, and I didn't realize nor appreciate all that Fond du Lac does in water quality standards. And I didn't realize how connected it was. When I think of like runoff and things, I think of like, you know, that story of like when the fires came through here in like 1918. Fond du Lac didn't have any fatalities because all the community members ran out into the lakes and the wetlands. And when the fire went around Came and devastated everyone in Came, the wetlands is what saved everybody here. So yeah, the reciprocal, you know, relationship that the community has to give back to water, you know, like it's kind of our turn to step up and protect it now since it protected the community. So with that, we will share your. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
That video that I sent to you yesterday. I gave Johnny the link and she put it in the chat.
Oh, good.
That might be something that we could do, and I don't know how much time
We've just run over because it's at 6 o'clock and we're at 6:13.
Oh, I thought we went from 5:30 to 6. We got close to 6:30.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah. I'm sorry. But then we have a little bit more.
So I don't know if you want to go back to them. Did you see your exception video?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that would be a great break.
Okay.
Yeah. Unless there's any other questions, I don't want to.
I just want to make a statement. I work with the tribes. Can they hear me online?
Maybe come right here.
I'm not a water quality person, but I care about the water. I'm not a water warrior or anything like that. But working with folks and like Nancy and Christina and Kari and now whole group of new folks just really makes me think about the water. So when we started the farm here, what brought Nancy here was me saving the wetlands. I worked to save the wetlands at Haskell Indian Nations University in Lawrence, Kansas. Now I'm working to save the wetlands out here. And that's what brought me here. And what made it important to be able to talk about what it is that we're doing. Also, the city of Duluth wants to spray for the Japanese knotweed in Chester Creek, which we live in, well, we've lived and guarded next to. So you have to know, as a homeowner, they sent us a letter and said, we're going to spray all of this herbicide on the Japanese knotweed, and you're not going to be able to garden for the next 4 years. And it's going to go, they didn't say that, but it's going to go right into Chester Creek, which is going to go right out into Lake Superior. So I have to become this activist. So then I called the people I know, like Kelsey from Invasive Species, and the 1854 Treaty Authority and everyone else that I could think of to get the city of Duluth Parks and Recreation to agree not to do that and come up with a different way. Well, they're doing it all over the city of Duluth, except for at Chester Creek right now. So that's all I say so far. But as far as like what Christina brought up, working with the tribes in Louisiana that who live and survive on what happens in the Gulf Coast, their shrimping, and their oyster beds, and their survival for hurricanes. So everything that we do here is taking away from something that they have to do there, including when the hurricanes come. When that big Katrina came and I met the tribes, I said to them, I said, hey, I said, I know you didn't go wait in that stadium. Us Indians, we know not to wait for the federal government to come save us. We learned that a long time ago. It's inherent. We don't wait on them. They said, no, we get in our boats and we go tie off on the Oak Chenier. But because of what's happening, that hypoxic stuff that's happening over there, them Oak Cheniers, they're eroding away and the oaks are dying and they're not left there anymore. And these are people that I know and have gotten to know over the years working with them. So then when we start our little farm up here, I'm like, well, hold on a minute. We're not going to be a part of their problem too. I thank you very much. I got a gift over here for you. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, everybody, I will just, I'm gonna plug just a few things and then we're gonna take a break. For those online, we'll have to say goodbye. And then the people here, we might go on a impromptu field trip. So thank you guys for tuning in and coming and sharing your time with us today. We have a food hub application for producers to sell their food here. You can find it in the agricultural department tab on the Fond du Lac website. Please remember that our plant giveaway will be next Saturday at the resource management at 8 a.m. until supplies are gone. And then our next class will be next Tuesday here. And the title is Caring for Fruit Trees and Shrubs. So please everyone come join us. And if not, with that, I'll say goodbye.
But next week, the people on Zoom who couldn't make it here, hopefully they go now. I'm sorry to see about not signing up. Can they hear me?
Maybe.
Barely?
No. Okay, we gotta go. So goodbye, everyone. If you okay, hold on one second. I'm sorry. I don't usually post this, so
the fruit tree and shrubs workshop next week, there will be a variety, at least, of Juneberries and blueberries and some other berries, all the berries that you normally find here, as a giveaway. Yeah. So tell your friends, don't tell your friends. Yeah, okay, we can say, you welcome into the Zoomers and we can go outside and take a look at a few.